Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in another few minutes, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. Can you hear me talking? I'm like a little bit letting the music. So I want to invite folks. We're going to invite people to share in the chat a piece of Torah that you wrestle with. I know it's hard to pick just one, but if there is a character that gets under your skin, a story, a person, a moment, when you come across it year after year, really all of Tanakh, doesn't have to just be Torah. Professor Plaskow, I should say I'm like Judith, but would love to hear if you have a favorite or least favorite Haftarah reading. So we'll take a few more minutes to arrive, but feel free to share in the chat some piece of Torah that you wrestle with. Okay, hello. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rabbi Jessica. I'm so honored, and I'm going to try to only say it a few times, to be here tonight with the opportunity to talk to Professor Judith Plaskow in honor of Shavuot, the holiday that we will begin together on Thursday evening. A little bit of where are we, what's happening. We are hosted tonight. We're in the Zoom Cloud Shul of Tzedek, Chicago. Rabbi Brandt is here humbly doing Zoom tech for us. So if you have any Zoom questions while you're here, you can message Brandt. And we'll be together for, what did we decide, like an hour 15, I think? We'll see, yeah. And so we won't have a break during that, but you are so welcome to eat dinner, put babies to bed. If you do have to, I do enjoy it when people's camera is on. If you are in a place where your camera can be on, it definitely helps us, feel more connected in the room. And if you're going to be moving around, a bunch. We appreciate turning the camera off, just so that our folks don't get too dizzy. Um, but yes, we want to feel that we are in this Zoom cloud, but also in the room together. I'm trying to think, is there any other housekeeping? I don't know. I think those are the things. So if you arrived in the last few minutes, you might see people are putting in the chat some piece of Torah that you wrestle with or struggle with. I'm like, and now the next hour will be Judith solving all of them for you. She's just she's gonna take them one at a time. No, just kidding. That's not what we asked her here to do. Um, but we are going to be talking about, among other things, how we read, how we wrestle with, how we pray with the challenging texts of Torah. And so wanted to invite people to kind of bring your own into the room. So we're here tonight, as I said, in honor of Shavuot. This is actually kind of the culminating event of this is I think the fifth holiday that I've gotten to spend at Tzedek Chicago this year, doing some learning in the Zoom cloud and getting to bring in new teachers and to study ritual together. And there's kind of no more perfect culmination to this year than getting to learn about Torah and talk Torah with Judith. So just to kind of ground us in this time, we are marking a moment in the agricultural cycle, offerings of first fruits, and this process of kind of blessing what is sprouting as we head into the rest of the growing season. We are culminating the counting of the Omer, this practice of experiencing layers of divinity, 7 elements over 7 days, 7 weeks. And we are famously marking the receiving of Torah at Sinai and the journey from Mitzrayim, from leaving the constriction of Pesach to revelation at Sinai. And so it's a holiday that is both about looking back and looking forward and looking inside ourselves and looking out into the world. And I think, Judith is a scholar that makes that more possible for me as a Jew and as a Jewish woman and as a Jewish queer woman. I'm going to be done talking so soon, but I will just share like the phrase that when I first read Standing Again at Sinai, my dog-eared copy of Standing Again at Sinai, when I read Judith write, the process of coming to write this book has been for me a gradual process of refusing the split between a Jewish and a feminist self. I am not a Jew in the synagogue and a feminist in the world. I'm a Jewish feminist and a feminist Jew in every moment of my life. When Jewish feminists allow Judaism and feminism to be defined by others in oppositional ways, then we are stuck with two givens confronting each other, and we are fundamentally divided. When, however, we refuse to sever or choose between different aspects of our identity, we create a new situation. If we are Jews not despite being feminists, but as feminists, then Judaism will have to change. We will work to change it, to make a whole new identity possible. This change, moreover, may lead to a new life for us and for the tradition. So this idea about not severing ourselves and then creating a new situation in the insistence of who we are made my adult Jewish life so much more possible. So thank you, Judith. And that's both as a woman, as a feminist, as a queer person, and also in my early days of struggling with Zionism, I just thought this is what's true for me, and I don't have to sever the different parts of myself. I get to bring that and then wrestle with the tradition. So I really could spend this whole hour just saying things I love about Judith Plaskow, but that's not why you came. So I have some questions. We'll do about like maybe 45 minutes of some questions we planned, but then invite folks to also share your questions in the chat. And we'll talk. So Judith, first question that we'd love to just hear you as we approach Sinai on Thursday, as we approach meeting Torah again, for you to talk through how you approach texts that are antithetical to your values, that ask you to sever yourself, and how that approach has changed, like how that started in Standing Again at Sinai and how that's changed over the years.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jessica, for your generous introduction and for having me. Yeah, dealing with difficult texts is really the core of my work. And I realize as I age that I do see that as my main contribution uh, to Jewish theology and to Jewish feminism. Um, uh, as I read the list of texts that people have difficulty with, I feel yes, yes, that too, that too, that too. And I believe very deeply that our texts shape us for good and for ill, and that we need to name and call out the texts that are destructive to human flourishing. So, my method is really very simple. It's like just say no uh, to awful texts. And I think that the dominant way in which certainly liberal Jews, but I think traditional Jews also have dealt with horrible texts is either to pass over them in silence or to interpret them apologetically. So, I noticed one of the moments that was named in the chat is Lot's handing his daughters to the men of Sodom to rape. And I think that comes in Vayera, which is an incredibly rich parsha. I mean, there's just so much in it. You could talk about it for a year. So if you're giving a Devar Torah or you're studying, why focus on that passage? It's easy to ignore. And then, you have an apologetic that Lot was influenced by the ethical values of Sodom, that he couldn't escape it completely. And, I think actually there's a midrash to that effect also. I grew up in a classical reform congregation where the central strategy was just to ignore awful texts. And I know that Reform rabbis are taught in rabbinical school never to preach against the text. And I think preaching against the text is absolutely essential. In the mid 1970s, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who's a Catholic biblical scholar, wrote an article called Feminist Theology as a Critical Theology of Liberation, in which she argued for the need to name the destructive aspects of our texts as a prerequisite, really, to moving forward to liberation. And that article, deeply affected me. So my approach actually hasn't changed. What's changed is the range of texts that I feel called on to address. So in Standing Again at Sinai, it was feminist texts, but then I moved on from there to write about LGBT issues, and actually, my partner and I initiated a Haftarah project at our synagogue, B'nai Jeshurun, where we deal with awful Haftarot. And we've talked about a lot of issues in relation to Jewish triumphalism, the violence of God, the demeaning of other traditions, misogyny. But misogyny is one in a whole host of issues. And if we don't talk about these things, then we can't address them. And our texts provide us a wonderful opening to talk about them. Because, often the violence that we see in our texts is a total mirror of the violence we see in our world. So our texts enable us to address the ways in which these issues continue in our own society.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's just still so refreshing to hear someone say, just say no, which is simple and yet still needs to be said. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about this idea of preaching against the text as something that is not only okay, but actually part of our responsibility. Like, what does that look like? What do you have examples of times when you've seen that or heard that powerfully done? Are there any ways where people preach against the text where you're like, oh, this doesn't work for me? And this, this is your answer as both a scholar and also a synagogue goer. I'm just curious, like yeah, what it means to you.
Yeah, so actually, many years ago now, I gave a ordination sermon at HUC in Cincinnati on preaching against the text, and it was Bamidbar. The Haftorah is Hosea chapter 2, which is a horrendous chapter in really the prophet when God engages in wife abuse,
Mhm.
and I talked about what was so interesting was the Haftorah was read as part of the ordination service, and they left out the central part of the chapter and just read the beautiful ending. Uh, so I was almost embarrassed up and talking about it because we'd had such an, total example. So, I mean, we know that domestic abuse is profoundly uh, widespread in our own society. So, why not use that text as a basis for opening up that question? And what I argued and what I still feel is that people are grappling with these issues in their lives. They appreciate their being named. So to get up and say we see abuse in this chapter of the prophet, and we can actually follow out the different stages often that happen in abusive relationship and open that up to people to begin to talk about. Yeah, and at the same time, I have to say I'm aware. The problem is that you could preach against the text every single week because there's always something horrible in the Parsha. And I'm not in favor of that. I don't think I would find it nourishing as a member of a community to always only hear that. But if you can trust that your leadership is aware of these issues and is willing to talk about them, and you feel free as a community member to raise the issues. There isn't a verboten sign
Mhm.
on those issues. Then I think it feels very different if one, if 2 out of 3 weeks, there's a nourishing parsha that's looking at the text positively, if you know that sooner or later they're going to get around to the hard issues. Now,
Mhm.
I've written a lot about Leviticus 18, the sexual laws of Leviticus, which traditionally are read not just as part of the annual cycle, but also on the afternoon of Yom Kippur. And a number of congregations have moved from that to reading instead Leviticus 19, which is a series of ethical injunctions. And, I've been very aware in writing about it. I'm not sure that Yom Kippur afternoon is the best time to preach against the text, although it's important to talk about our communal sins,
Mhm.
as well as individual sins. So, I'm aware that it may be that reading against the text is more fruitful and important in study
Mhm.
than it is. Well, it's important in preaching, but not just preaching against the text. I think it's really important in study because, in study you can engage um, and share on personal level, in a very different way.
Yeah. Well, and part of what I appreciate is like when you lay out the options, and the options are to completely ignore, pretend that it's not there, or apologetics, like write it away. Like it just feels like, yes, obviously wrestling with it, saying what's wrong about it, bringing it into day-to-day life, like that does kind of feel like the only ethical option, like when you list them out like that. So I just yeah, appreciate the kind of like straightforward um a lot of your work I find, while both really deep, is also just very direct about like these are the facts, like these are the options, and so let's be with what is. Um,
I
so oh,
think one thing that it's okay, a week where there's something difficult in the text, but also a lot of great stuff to just acknowledge
mhm.
that a particular passage is there and it's hard to hear. And, we have talked about it, we'll talk about it again. But now, today we're going to talk about
Mhm.
something else.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to like staying on the topic of like how we read things. Your I think your feminist approach, both in what you just shared. I've read the way, or part of reading you is the way, kind of a foundational feminist assumptions about the world and about who we are as people affects your scholarship. I think like most specifically, I was recently really moved when thinking about your understanding of chosenness. And in Standing in at Sinai, you say basically like chosenness is only necessary if we ignore that humans need each other. Like if we say if it's just like an individual process where we have to be, I think, persuaded to connect, then Judaism needs to be the best, and Jews need to be chosen. But in a world where we understand that we are relational beings and connected with each other, which is a very feminist understanding, then we don't actually need chosenness. Like we are connected. And I'm curious if there's other ways in which like your presence in or your feminist work affected your reading of like other areas of struggle in Torah, like how your feminism impacts how you relate to the xenophobia in Torah, the war, the empire, supremacy of all kinds, like how that has shaped your work.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my feminist critical perspective is something that, other people have picked up and brought to a whole range of texts, and that I pick up and, bring to a whole range of texts. I mean, it was interesting because last night I was speaking at Central Synagogue, and I read aloud a poem that I hadn't read for a long time, but there were years where I sort of introduced every lecture with that poem. And I suddenly realized that it had a horrifying bit of ableist perspective in it. And it was like, whoa, I had read it a zillion times and I had never noticed it. And it was really through Julia Watts-Bels's work and my relationship with her that, I came to see, we have to do something uh, about this. So I would say that I'm constantly, um, noticing uh, problems in the text in a whole range of texts that I hadn't noticed before. I mean, the first way I think my method was picked up was in relation to LGBT issues, and I began using it in relation to that, and yeah, I mean, there's just so many issues and divine violence, misogyny, just yeah. I mean, it's all over the place in our liturgy and our texts.
So how, yeah, if you, I mean, I think in particular in this time, if you'd be willing to speak on like war, empire, violence, that kind of divine violence, how you read that, how you wrestle with that.
Well, in the last many years, and certainly since October 7th, I've been trying to educate myself about Palestinian history, and I've been reading a lot of Palestinian narratives, and that makes um, the conquest narrative jump out of the Torah, of the liturgy. I mean, not that I haven't noticed it before, but this is, where I feel myself struggling in prayer most at the moment. Do I say this? How do I say this? What does it mean? It's yeah. So that's where I'm really struggling at the moment. And I mean, the longing for Zion, is just absolutely central to the liturgy. And, is there a difference between Zion and the state of Israel? Yes, there is a difference between Zion and the state of Israel, but our relationship with one shapes our feelings and attitudes towards the other, so what do you do with that? I mean, liturgically and, in terms of the text, it's horrifying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, not you don't have to give the answer. There's a lot of rabbis in this room, so but I'm curious, like, if you have one, like, what do you do with that liturgy these days? Or and that also might be a personal question about your own prayer life, but yeah, like, what are some different strategies? Again, do we skip over it or do we pray against it? Like, how? Yeah. What's?
I think sometimes I say the words, but notice my no to them, and
Mm,
some things I just refuse to say. Um, yeah, so in terms of my personal prayer experience, I I have different moments. I mean, it's interesting to me that, sometimes we'll be reading a text from the Torah that, I've read every year, I've heard a gazillion times, and suddenly I find myself in a towering rage
mm,
about the text. And it's, well, what, why this moment? The last 5 years, I didn't feel in a rage when we read it, or sometimes I'll walk out. Actually, when it comes to the Torah, sometimes I really can't bear it. Occasionally, I will walk out, but
wow.
I can't. I mean, it's funny how all of a sudden something will hit me in a much more powerful way than it had,
Hmm.
recently anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that it is a living tradition and we are
Right.
also living and that yeah, yeah, that feels like a big part of it. Um yeah, I'm curious, well, speaking about prayer, if would love to talk a little bit about ritual specifically, like you and your generation really I think of feminists and in Jewish tradition created so many new rituals that were both materially challenging patriarchy and tradition, and also trying to make things that are spiritually resonant and meaningful. And I think especially as people struggling with Zionism and the conquest and the text um, and what Israel is doing right now are often creating new ritual the question about like how to make ritual that embodies our politics and our values without being a lecture is kind of is a question that I often struggle with and I think that you write about in Standing Again at Sinai that kind of like you know the things that move people are going to stick around and will do them again, and the things that don't move people won't, which I have found very freeing. I'm curious, like, what facilitates new Jewish ritual in your life? What are ways that you found of creating new Jewish practice that were, if there are things that were common practice in the 80s in feminist Jewish space, but you feel like we've forgotten how to do? Like, I'm curious about like the art of new ritual. Yeah.
So I've been part of a Jewish feminist spirituality collective that's actually going to meet for its 45th year next week. And one of the incredible gifts of that group for me has been learning how to create new rituals. And, the first 2 years that we met, we tried to find a common denominator in prayer. And at the end of our second year, we decided we weren't going to do that anymore, that we were going to empower individuals who had some vision of what they wanted to do in prayer to take us as far outside the boundaries as they wanted, and we would go along. If we couldn't go along, we'd walk out and talk about it later. But that just opened an incredible flood of experimentation. And what I learned from that is how radically one can innovate and it can still feel Jewish. And over the years, creating new ritual has been central to what we do as a group. When we, the first night when we meet, we appoint a ritual committee, and anybody can be on the ritual committee. And in the course of the weekend, anybody can ask the ritual committee for a ritual. So it could be for anything. It could be maybe somebody was ordained and their rabbinical school ordination felt like it didn't work for them and they want the group to redo it. Or it could be somebody moved, or they're having difficulty in a relationship and they need to remove some blockages. It could be writing a book. It could be absolutely anything. And the ritual committee comes up with a ritual. And it's just amazing. Let me just give one specific example. A couple of years ago, someone who had a very difficult relationship with her daughter was about to go to her daughter's wedding, and she wanted to clear the schmutz out of the relationship before the wedding. And the ritual committee used B'dikach HaMetz, the ritual where before Pesach we declare that our Hametz is dust and doesn't exist. And it was totally amazing. So, she did a ritual where she was sweeping and reciting the formula for B'dikach HaMetz. So it was something that, of course, is not ritualized in the tradition, but using, a very traditional Jewish form. Not that all our rituals do that, but it was just a particularly creative use of an individual need and intersecting with the tradition. And what I've learned from that is you can think that you know something. She could say, I want to clear out the schmutz in my relationship with my daughter. I need to do some clearing before I go. But when you ritualize it, you take it in on a totally different level, emotionally, physically, and it's really very, very profound. So, I think in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of goddess ritual. That was done by Jewish feminists, invoking the ancient goddesses, and that's still part of feminist practice. I don't think it's essential, maybe, but I know that in New York there are a couple of anti-Zionist prayer groups that have popped up that function basically as support groups. And, I think the question of what a non-Zionist liturgy would look like is such an interesting and challenging question. And I think, a non-Zionist liturgy is actually, in a way, more challenging than an anti-Zionist liturgy, because you could probably come up with some responses to the traditional liturgy. But how do you take that piece out of the liturgy? I don't have an answer to that, but I just think it's so intriguing, and not to try to address those issues on a ritual level is sad. It's a really interesting and important challenge.
I'm really okay. So you said you think non-Zionist liturgy would actually be harder than anti-Zionist liturgy. Would you like to say a little bit more about?
Well, actually, I mean, maybe that's not true. I'd be
We're
interested to
yeah.
hear more. But I think, one could come up with invocations, prayers, whatever that directly address and challenge
Mm,
the Zionist aspects of the liturgy.
mhm,
But if you're asking yourself, what might the liturgy look like beyond that, that's
mhm,
kind of mind-boggling. I
mhm,
mean, for the last 6 years, I've had a chavruta with Mara Benjamin, who's a Jewish feminist theologian of the next generation, who's just drafted a book on the challenge of climate change to Jewish thought. And in that Havruta, we have been dealing really centrally for the last 60 years with human exceptionalism and the absolute centrality of human exceptionalism to Torah, to liturgy, to how do you get rid of human exceptionalism?
Oh, look at all this wind.
And we need to overcome, human exceptionalism to address the climate crisis. How do you do that? I think that, a non-Zionist liturgy is a similar level of challenge.
mhm.
How do you redo
Would
it? And that's absolutely woven throughout.
yeah, and part of what I'm thinking about just with your what you said about like skipping over things, the risk of skipping over things that we have just or what came to mind is like the prayer in the Amidah for the ingathering of exiles. Um, it is much more meaningful to imagine rewriting that than to just skip over it. Yeah, we've had like 2,000 years of people saying that prayer, and that is very embedded in the idea that in many Jewish concepts of what we're praying for. And I do think it's part of our responsibility right now to say, okay, if not for the ingathering of exiles, then what does it mean to gather our tzitzit? What does it mean to say that? Like, where are we trying? Is it an internal sense of home? And is it and I think there is a lot to play with to discover. Um, but yeah, like I think your kind of your premise in we have to reckon with what the text is actually saying and not ignore it feels um there's more integrity in like rewriting that prayer than in just skipping it. To me, it feels like.
And it's hard to imagine. So yeah, so could we write a prayer that was an affirmation of diaspora and something about the diversity of the Jewish people, and in all our places of diaspora, we think of our, the oneness in our diversity or whatever, as we gather. I mean,
Okay, your assignment, everyone, you've heard your assignment.
it's interesting because that's actually the gathering of the tzitzit is a prayer. I've stopped saying I can't.
Like
So
that paragraph of before the Shema.
yeah, so yeah, I mean that's right. What would be an alternative paragraph? That would
Okay, well, we're gonna meet back here next Shavuot, and I want everyone to bring their paragraphs of that text because I'm looking around this room and like these are some folks who could write it. I want to just ask one other question, and then if other folks, if you have questions you want to ask and you want to start putting them in the chat or composing them in your mind, and we would love to hear that, but or love to see those in the chat. Since you mentioned your Havruta with Mara Benjamin, I'm also just so influenced by your Havruta with Carol Christ of blessed memory and your book with her, or many books with her. And this also feels like a very feminist part of your practice that you co-author and study to get, and a very Jewish part also. Havruta obviously very Jewish. I'm wondering if you could speak to, I don't know, give a little pitch to the room for like get yourself a Havruta or like how Havruta has worked in your life as a scholar, as a theologian.
Havruta, it has been one of the total joys of my retirement. When I guess actually at the beginning of the pandemic, I had read Mary Jane Rubenstein's Pantheologies, which is an argument for a multiple pantheism and an exploration of the fear of pantheism. And I loved the book, but I found it really difficult. And I asked Mara if she would read it with me. And we started reading. So, we'd read, I don't know, 20 pages a week or whatever, and then, discuss it in depth, pick up particular phrases, and then we ended up spending almost a year actually reading all the footnotes in that book, which took us to the environmental humanities. And it's been completely fabulous. I say that, I went to graduate school in theology because I loved talking about theological questions. And I had this fantasy of, sitting around a seminar table and getting to talk about questions I really cared about. And I hated graduate school. I mean, it was total apprenticeship. It had nothing to do with really exploring questions one cared about. And I feel in Hebruta, I've gotten to have the graduate seminar that I always wanted to have. And I've also had a Hebruta with Nancy Flam for over 6 years, where we've been studying Hasidic theology. We spent 3 years studying the Tanya, which is the foundational text of Chabad Hasidism. And that's also been amazing. I mean, just studying with someone is just a great experience. I mean, there's no way on earth that either Nancy or I would ever have read the Tanya on our own. We would have probably given up after 5 pages. And, we made it through over 1,000 pages over 3 years, working through it together. So the learning, the connection, I mean, it's a great experience. Highly recommend. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, Mara and I have actually read almost no Jewish texts. We've read in the environmental humanities, but we've brought Jewish methods of study to our non-Jewish texts.
I love that, bringing Havruta to non-Jewish texts. I'm like, retirement feels like a long way off for me, but like, yeah, getting to take the big texts piece by piece. Okay, I'm gonna pause and see whether anyone has questions. And I also haven't, there might also be, um, okay, I don't know whether you intended this as a question for the room, Marcy, but I think this would be a great, I would love to hear Judith on this about, I'm challenged by understanding just what Torah is, understandings of the divine and divine law and a people's experience written down by humans who understood themselves as revelation. Like, how do we understand what is Torah, and how does that impact what we're saying no to in it? I'm curious, Judith, if you
That's a big question. So let me start. I mean, I understand by Torah. I mean, obviously, Torah in its narrow sense is the the 5 books of Moses and the scroll at the Meron at the front of the synagogue. But Torah really expands to include all of Jewish learning and teaching, and there's oral Torah, the rabbinic text, but actually one of the a central question for me is, how do we bring women's Torah into our liturgy? So in the last 50 years, there's been a tremendous amount of work recovering Jewish women's history, and people have written commentaries and all kinds of wonderful things about Torah in a narrow sense, and Torah and oral Torah. But who knows about it? are we teaching all that in our religious schools? Or, when we talk about Torah in the synagogue, are we just talking about the five books? How do we bring women's Torah and the Torah of other marginalized voices into the synagogue? So, I mean, I personally think that the Haftorah should be not the traditional Haftorah, but a reading from a marginalized voice that connects to the Torah reading. And that's an opportunity to broaden our understanding of Torah. Torah is Jewish learning in its broadest sense.
I think part of this question I'm curious is like, how does the sacredness of Torah, I think, and the relationship between Torah and the divine, where is that in your study and your reception of Torah?
Well, I mean, yes, Torah is written down by human beings, and you hope that those human beings, or some of those human beings, had their own experiences of the divine that were reflected in what they wrote. And there are moments where you can feel that experience reverberating through the text. And, I don't think you can say in advance. Actually, it's Buber, who says so powerfully that, Torah wasn't given, that we receive the Torah at Sinai when we can take in, um, what we're hearing or reading as Torah. And, we can't know in advance what that's going to be. But I have certainly had the experience in studying Torah with friends or in, my Havra communities of, you know, feeling the presence of the divine in the room, in the in the text. So it can happen, and I think that's the gift and the hope, is that reading and studying opens us out to that experience.
I'm just thinking about like the confidence with which you're like, sometimes I walk out of the room because I can't hear it. And then sometimes I feel the divine voice reverberating through, and we actually don't know what it's going to be each day that we go, or that we turn to Torah or go to shul or, open a prayer book. And I think, yeah, that to me, I'll just reflect like that feels like some of the maturity of feminist Jewish theology that I feel like anti-Zionist Jewish theology is like still maybe developmentally reaching for, just as it's where we are, um, to be open to both like some days I'm going to leave the room and some days I'm going to feel the voice of the divine reverberating through it, and I accept either possibility and can still like be with the text and be with the prayer book. I think sometimes, and this is also because of the violence that's happening, people want, like really want to know in advance and kind of control what kind of experience we're going to have. But also, okay, I'll just, I think part of that seems like you were very embedded in and have created feminist prayer communities where you knew that your basic self was respected and safe and
Right.
held in the tradition, like, which is not true in a lot of Jewish prayer spaces these days, So that's like, yeah, the process of that feels really, there's a lot
Yeah, so
to be
let me
learned.
give you an example, actually. In the Havara in the Pioneer Valley that I was a member of for many, many years, one week we were studying Parshat Emor, which is the Parsha which talks about the defects of a priest who cannot offer sacrifices. And, it was one of the things named in the chat. It's a horrible, horrible, um, ableist passage. And in talking about it as a Havara, we were talking about our own experiences of illness and disability, and how the perspective reflected in the text had shaped our experience, and how we were wrestling with that. It was an amazing, powerful discussion that, included the no to the text, but also creatively used the text as a stepping stone to do something that was really amazing and opened something up. So, it's the same text can function in paradoxical ways, in a given moment.
I love that. Yeah. So, and there's a question in the chat about why are we reading every passage in Torah when there's so many other sacred texts in our tradition? Like we could be reading more prophets, and other parts of Jewish ethics, like other texts. And I know, yeah, I'm just curious, Judith, if there are other texts that you wish got more read in either from the Jewish shelf, or I know the part of your revision about the Haftarah is bringing not just
Right.
classic Jewish texts to speak to Torah, but yeah, are there other Jewish texts that you think we should be reading more?
Well, my favorite text in the Tanakh is the book of Job. And I think it's so sad that so many people are unfamiliar with the book of Job. We don't read it. I mean, it's long, so you can't read it like you can read Ruth or Shir. I get that, but that we don't read it and study it and talk about it, it's an incredible book, and it's the only book in the Torah that really seriously decenters human exceptionalism, and it's incredible in terms of dealing with the problem of evil, which everybody is dealing with, and dealing incredible nature image. I mean, it's an astounding text. So I wish I wish we'd find a way to read and study that text.
Okay,
That
well, who's got a Shavuot? If you don't have Shavuot plan yet, you have 2 days to get the Book of Job and find a Havruta. Um, I'm so intrigued by that. I was going to ask another question about that, about what your study of environmental um, sciences and environmental humanities has brought to your Torah study. If you want to talk more about that, but I'm gonna also just turn back to the chat. A question from Peyton: is there anything you, as a veteran Jewish academic, are seeing coming up with new and up and coming Jewish feminist scholars and their analysis of Torah and Tanakh that excite you or you find innovative?
um well um I think, there's a lot of new trans Torah, which I find interesting. I mean, there's a sense in which the methodology, there's I can't say that there's anything new methodologically that comes to my mind. There's subject matter that's new and interesting and rich. And I think, the emerging scholarship on trans issues is certainly one example of that.
Okay,
But
well,
yeah, but no,
no, keep going.
no, no. I'm just thinking about what's the stop.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna. I'm like, I would be remiss not to say, check out the Trans Halacha project started by Lainey, who's here in this room. Really, and also other people, but among other people, Lainey, who's here in this room. Yeah, there's just really
Yeah,
incredible.
it's incredible. It's
Hmm.
incredible resources.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I'm curious if there is more around. I mean, this is something in the study you're doing with Mara and the work around environmental crisis of our time that you want to bring in. Like, what else has come forward in that Havruta? Um, how are you thinking about human exceptionalism in the text, or if there's other issues that have kind of been exposed from or spotlit in your study of environmentalism, like when you're reading with Mara and then you go to shul and open Torah, like what's coming up there?
Uh, yeah, I'm not sure how much connection there is between. what we're talking about and what I'm reading in the text. I mean, I'm more alive to the nature imagery in a number of the Psalms. And I'm always asking critically, is this still a text in which human exceptionalism is central or not? To what extent is it, is it less active in this text? Yeah, but I haven't. I can't say that I've struggled with the liturgy in the same way around this issue as around issues of Jewish triumphalism and Zionism.
Yeah, in some ways, I don't know, for me, like the Jewish liturgy feels very in line with everything that's happening. I'm like, yes, if we act badly, the floods and that there's a
Yes,
human
right.
connection to
Yes.
um
So let me say, so every week when I read the second paragraph of the Shema, if you disobey,
mm,
um, if your land isn't going to yield produce and you're going to disappear. I mean, every week when I read that, absolutely, that's that's what's happening. That's a description of what's happening. Totally.
yeah. Yeah, and that's, part of staying open in prayer is experiencing that. Are there other folks with questions? Oh yeah, okay. Coming back again. Should we be tied to the weekly parsha? Is this the best way to construct our services today? Really?
So I mean that's such an interesting question, and yeah, I guess I'd love to see alternatives, and to me, it feels like at the moment, the most I can push is to do that in the Haftorah. I'm not part of a community, where it's possible to imagine that. But I'd sure be interested to see what that looked like. So, I guess, um, you know, quite a few years ago now, Lori Lefkowitz wrote an article sort of challenging me, saying, why should this question, why should Torah be central? Maybe we need fluids and voices, and rather than Torah. I don't feel like um, I've seen that notion developed, but I'd really be interested in it. It's not. I, I have to acknowledge I'm a traditionalist in that I can't imagine not reading and engaging with Torah. I mean, partly because it has. Well, all right. So this is the issue that I struggle with, because it shaped us so deeply. I think it's really important to read it and to lift up the parts of it that have shaped us negatively and acknowledge that and deal with that. And then I ask myself, fine, that's great for me and my generation and the next generation. Do we want to keep reading it to our children so they can be wounded too? And I really don't have the answer to that question. I think that that's going to be somebody else who comes along and says, no, we're going to do something else. And this is how it's going to be Jewish, but that it's not going to be me.
Mm,
I think that, part of the problem with reading against the text for so long is that it's actually difficult for me to read with the text, because I'm always afraid that reading with the text is gonna, fall into saying, well, the text also says love your neighbor as yourself, and that's more essential than all the ethnocentric texts. And I don't believe that. I don't believe one's more essential than the other. I believe we choose which texts we lift up. So I'm always afraid that reading with the text is going to get somehow pulled into a an argument over what's more essential.
Mm. The parts that we like, is there a true core to Judaism? Is it truly welcome the stranger, or is it truly conquest? And you
Exactly.
and you would come down on there's no essential nature. It
Yes.
holds both, and we have to
Right.
choose. I'm
And
with I'm with her.
what is essential is the text. I mean, to
Mhm.
me, that's what's essential. What links Jews, across time and place, this story, this text,
Mhm. Yeah.
what we lift up, what lessons we take from it, how we live it out, how we interpret it, that's radically multiple.
Mhm.
But that sense that this is our text,
Mhm.
that to me, that's the essence. So it's hard for me. I mean, I'd love to be at a service where it wasn't. I'm not, but I'm not going to be the person who does that.
Right. Well, and part of I, there's we can have serve, and you've talked about having ritual that explores all different aspects of our lives and brings in other things. So it's not, you're here for the creative ritual and also be it in the weekly Torah study, be it at Shavuot, like the story remains, like the
Yeah,
text
so
tradition
actually,
remains.
in fact, let me contradict myself, because at Benodesh, at our Jewish Feminist Spirituality Collective, one of the things that we've been, working on is what does it mean to make women's words Torah?
Mm,
So, on one occasion, for example, the two oldest women in the group shared a piece of their life wisdom as Torah. And before and after they spoke, we recited the Torah blessings. So
mhm,
we've done a lot of things like that at Benodesh, of
mhm,
using texts that we wrote Friday afternoon before Shabbat on a particular theme and reading them as Torah. So actually, the fact is, I participated in that um, in many occasions, but it's a marginal community.
mhm,
That's obviously different from
mhm.
you know reading it in a local synagogue, which I don't mean to say I'm opposed to it. I mean, it
Yeah.
can be very exciting to try that out, but I'm not. You need a lot of discussion and when working things through to
Mhm.
do that well.
Well, and part of what I'm thinking about is Torah itself took some centuries of, what are the versions of the stories that are gonna become what we read every week. And if we think about how new the kind of freedom we have with the text right now is, and the kind of, voices that are being brought to Torah and being blessed as Torah, we got another like 100 years before we know what the texts are that are gonna have the like resonance and stickiness to like actually be read every week in a meaningful way. And I think what you're saying about Haftarah, starting with Haftarah is like a really beautiful, like, okay, you read the Torah and then you bring something else to talk to it. We already have a ritual technology that lets us kind of gently push on the text with the idea of like something else being in conversation with it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that's part of how something feels Jewish is that we use the Jewish technology and the Jewish
right, exactly.
traditions to move the tradition. Yeah. Okay, I want to bring in this question from Lainey, and then maybe we'll have time for like one more. Lainey says, "How do you balance separatist spaces versus being in regular quote quote regular communities? Are there lines that you draw personally that help you sustain yourself as you participate in a range of communities?" So, we've heard you talk about like feminist spiritual community, kind of closed community, talk about BJ, talking about studying in a range, praying in a range of places. Yeah, how do you navigate those different spaces?
Well, I think that, you know, I think that I realize that the way that I've been able to remain a somewhat optimistic Jewish feminist for the last 50 years is by participating in communities that have created uh, the Judaism that we want to live.
Mm.
And, without those separatist communities that um, lived out new possibilities, I'm not sure that it would be possible to be in a regular community, and yet the regular community has spectacular music and rabbinic wisdom and larger community and lots of different study groups and possibilities, that the small communities don't have. So I mean, for me, they enrich each other. And for many years, it's only been in the last 15 years that I belong to a synagogue. Otherwise, I've been a Havarad Jew my whole life. And in the first years that I was in my Jewish Feminist Spirituality Collective, I really lived from year to year for that weekend. And then over time, I was able to bring a fair amount of what we did there into our Havarot. So I think that one of the things that's been remarkable and life-giving about Jewish feminism is how things pioneered in Jewish feminist spaces, like Miriam's Cup, for example, have found their way into the larger Jewish community. Or some of the music that was created at Benodesh, at our spirituality collective, is now sung in congregations all over the place. And, I could be at a congregation in the Midwest. I think once I was even in Europe and they were singing something that was created there. And it's like, how did that happen? So, it's what you said before, that what works has has the power to disseminate more widely, and there's something rich about seeing the changes in a larger community. I would also say that there are certain minimal things that I would expect. I mean, when I first went to, the first time I ever went to BJ, I was blown away by the combination of the music and the politics. And if they weren't both there, I'm not sure that I would have stayed. So, there are certain bottom lines,
Mm-hmm.
I think, that allow me to move back and forth.
You said you haven't belonged to a synagogue until the last like 15 years. So that's for, I'm not going to give away Judith's age, but she's been publishing for some decades before that. And I think for those of us that are hungry to have more, I don't know, just what you said about like for many years, I just lived from year to year of having like once a year, I would have a resonant spiritual experience. And then it wasn't until like 2010 that you found a community in New York City, like where there's plenty of Jews that like resonated. And I think, I
Right.
mean, I want us to have more and sooner, but just to kind of, I don't know, like,
I know. I mean, my son was laughing at me recently when I was going on and on about, how great the synagogue was. He said, Mom, whoever thought you would end up, in a big synagogue. And, if you had said that to me 20 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. So, you know,
Yeah,
you don't know,
being open to change and is beautiful thing. Yeah. Well, and your influence, you have very much shaped that there are now synagogues that more of us can go to and not be severed in that way. So again, thank you. Um, I think we're gonna come to a close. I'll just say I have a closing, but Judith, anything that's percolating for you? Any um thing you wanna, as we head into reading Torah on Shavuot or trying to receive it?
right? So we never know when we're going to receive it, right?
Mm, yeah, being open to that. Okay, I want to close. I realize in the middle of this with some with this. Speaking of people of all genders can write new liturgy. In fact, Rabbi Brant Rosen has written this Kaddish de Rabbanan. You can have it in the chat for later, or I'm just going to read it because um, yeah, if in your honor, Judith, this is a prayer for our teachers, and I just want to again say thank you. If folks want to put in the chat other gratitudes that you have, um, I will make a plug if you want to. Uh, you may have donated some in your registration for tonight. If you want to make a donation to Tzedek Chicago to support further programming, that is very welcome. But really, just so grateful, Judith, that you were willing to come tonight and both share the Torah that you've been sharing for decades and also tell us about what you're wrestling with still today and the kind of unanswered questions and the prayers that you newly can't say or are still kind of wrestling. It's just like it's a very inspiring um, to see lifelong wrestling and not think that we need to resolve anything anytime soon, but we're gonna keep wrestling.
Thank you.
Um, Al Yisrael, Vial Rabbanan, Vial Talmidehon. For our community, for our teachers and students, those who receive and learn and hand down the teachings of all who have gone before us, for those who explain, those who discern, those who make connections, those who draw out the truths patiently waiting to be revealed, for those who challenge words that cause harm, those who reinterpret, reframe, and redeem meanings that might otherwise lead us astray, for those who learn through study and those who learn from experience, those who learn from all peoples, cultures, and traditions, those who live out the wisdom they have gained, who know that every conversation, every move, every breath is a precious opportunity to learn Torah anew. Yehi lahon ulchon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamim. May the source of all wisdom grant us abundant peace, loyalty, love, and compassion. And let us say, Amen. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope everyone has a meaningful and delicious Shavuot, and hope to be studying with you all again soon. Good night. People